Hello, everyone. I'm Carol Ann Asante of SIDA and the SIDA Youth Foundation. A key outcome of the impact the pandemic had on travel was a greater understanding of the importance of travel insurance on student group travel. Today, we're bringing one of the foremost authorities on travel insurance, Jason Woods, Vice President, TI Global, DBA of Travel Insured, to share perspectives on how travel insurance supports the recovery of global student travel. Jason, you've spent much of your career in the global insurance industry. Can you share a bit about your background and tell us about Travel Insured?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Carol Ann. It's a pleasure to be here and present to you and the greater group at CITA. Um, yes, my name is Jason Woods. I've been with Travel Insured International now since October of 2019. However, as Carol Ann mentioned, my background in insurance has been over 20 years at this point in a variety of capacities, be it at the insurance carrier, third-party administrators, and managing general agencies as well. Um, Throughout that time, I've experienced lots of different products and services and partners, and I'm happy to be here with you today.
That's terrific, and we really appreciate having you with us. And I'd like to share also that Travel Insured has been a great partner of SIDA and the SIDA Youth Foundation, and especially in the SIDA Youth Foundation in providing scholarships so students can travel. Jason, as we were preparing for the Global Forum, one of the top questions that kept coming up related to travel insurance. And certainly, as I mentioned earlier, I'd like to call it a silver lining was, as I said, a greater understanding in that trip planning process and on travel insurance. But what I'd love to hear and share with our attendees today are what are the trends that you're seeing in travel insurance as a result of the pandemic and where we are today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great point that the unfortunate circumstances of the pandemic has really brought a great awareness of travel insurance. Not only the fact that it's available and it's out there, but the benefits of it as well. So we are seeing a lot greater interest in it and an educational learning curve, to be honest, on what the benefits and services are. Um, Over time, over the last year, obviously we spent a lot of time, excuse me, speaking to individuals with regard to how the triggers of their insurance are affecting them, right? And so, cancellations in advance of events, interruptions during that time as well, and then any delays that are happening. And there's been lots of questions and moving goalposts, so to speak, as it relates to definitions of quarantine, self quarantine, border closures, and things of that nature. So this last year has been, I'd say, a learning curve for all of us in the details of policy language, but it is bringing forth a number of changes in the market going forward, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, and I think too, what would be important on our call today, we have attendees from all over the world. And I know that travel insurance, certainly even just in the United States, varies from state to state. I know every country has different rules as it relates to global and travel insurance, but my understanding is that every country offers some type of travel insurance policy. If you could just speak a little bit to the global market and how that works.
Yes, absolutely. So Travel Insured International historically offered domestic U.S. citizens travel insurance, both domestically and if traveling abroad. And as you mentioned, those are filed in the U.S. and are policies that are state specific. However, we also now offer international global medical products outside of the U.S. for domestic and non-domestic travelers in the youth and adult group space. As far as coverages are concerned, there is a difference in what individuals buy and why they buy. So historically, U.S. citizens have bought trip protection coverages or cancellation pre-trip coverages because many of their trips are domestic and therefore domestic health insurance covers the medical components of that. Whereas international travelers tend to purchase medically focused products because of the literally geographic nature of their borders, overlapping and the travel being more international in focus. For their domestic, kind of state or government medical plans, they're covered in that instance. So rules and regulations do differ by country, but generally the products, coverages and limits are fairly similar.
Oh, that's great. And that's good to know because I know that was something that really came out of our experience. And we had a call with some of the principals and school administrators from different countries as part of the global forum. And overwhelmingly, they all talked about needing insurance. They talked a little bit from having some sort of insurance to cover deposits, but mostly really talking about a better understanding of how to provide that trip insurance for the students that are traveling, and especially having the parents understand the value of the trip insurance and how they can ensure that the group buys the insurance and that the group is insured should something happen for the future. Now, when we talked earlier, what was really interesting was helping us break down a better understanding of some of the definitions that are floating out there right now. We talked a bit about countries maybe requiring different levels of insurance or medical insurance. And I think the really big one, of course, relates to quarantining and how travel insurance may be impacting that. So if you might help us, really just got to get an understanding of the common language, that would be terrific.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are great points with any insurance coverage, is to really understand what it is that's available to you and how it actually works, right? And so quarantine as a defined term has been slightly different depending on the policies and the carriers that you're working with. While technically feels and sounds like a quarantine of sorts, is not specifically defined in the policies, and therefore is not a covered reason as well. Now, to expand upon that, one of the coverage options that many companies out there have is a cancel for any reason buy-up option. And that cancel for any reason, or commonly referred to as CFAR, is a separate coverage, and it's an expansion of the covered reasons that are already in the policy. So covered reasons are very specific, outlined. You can look to them and know what's triggering it. The cancel for any reason option is really a cancel for your reason. And technically that means, if you don't want to go for fear of travel, if you don't want to go for any reason that's not specifically covered, you can go ahead and cancel, and then you're eligible for a percentage of your non-refundable trip costs. And that percentage does differ by insurance carrier.
Well, we've been hearing that, it's a constantly changing environment. Countries are going up and down. You're hearing about there's a spike. So maybe someone doesn't want to travel to that location, or there might be a change, at the last minute when you talked about cancel for any reason. But I think there were some key things that we learned about it in how you would enact that, or that, you have to a certain amount of time period before you can actually call that in and be able to use that policy. Is that still the case today?
Yes, and that's an excellent point. And so kind of the coined market phrase is time sensitive period. And that's a great point, which is the pre-purchase phase. And so time sensitive period can be defined a couple of different ways. It's generally based off of your initial deposit for that trip, or it can be based off of the departure date or final payment for a trip. So it's important to look at your policy in advance and recognize what that time sensitive period is. And it relates directly to really two pieces of or two triggers within your policy. One is your ability to even purchase the cancel for any reason optional buy-up. And then the other piece is whether or not it allows you then to waive any pre-existing conditions. So the waiver of pre-existing conditions in today's environment is the less sensitive piece, but I think it's an important one to keep in mind when we're referring to time-sensitive period. Both can be quite important and needs to be looked at, especially as it relates to your own timing of offering your trip. So if you're responsible for organizing and putting together an experience and a trip, you want to make sure that you're making it very clear to the individuals that are going to be attending what their time sensitive period is so that they have adequate time to make a decision.
That's great. And, there was some talk, for example, that pandemics would be exclusionary for coverage in any way. I saw that in the event industry when I was trying to purchase event insurance, but is that similar? Are there any exclusions in travel insurance area?
It really does differ by insurance carrier in this case. Some carriers did have a specific exclusion related to pandemic, others did not. And in many cases, I'm thankful to say as a market, many carriers and suppliers in their own cancellation and refund policies really went above and beyond to expand their existing policies to offer some form of reimbursement or coverage.
That's great. And, with all the things that are happening right now, and a lot of what we're talking about is we're on the trip, the group has traveled to a destination and someone potentially gets sick while they're on the trip. And in some way they have to cancel, the student would have to cancel, they've come down with it, or for example, they're showing symptoms. They need to not be able to participate on the trip and have to return home. And there was a lot of question on, they understand what you've explained about the pre-trip and the CFAR, but is there any area that we should really be understanding if we're traveling and you potentially have a student who gets sick while on travel as it relate to travel insurance and what might be covered should they have to return home?
That's a fantastic question, especially considering where we're at in the world of travel today, right? People are looking to get out of their homes and start to experience the world once again and each other. And so the idea of, I'm now on a trip, I'm excited about it, and either myself or someone I'm traveling with test positive potentially for COVID or needs to be quarantined as a result. And so that's where we really start to focus in on a couple of benefits, one being the trip interruption, certainly, in terms of covered reasons and covered, quarantine being a component of that under covered reasons as well, but also the travel delay benefit. And so the travel delay benefit in coordination with trip interruption is quite important. And the reason why, so from an interruption standpoint, there are coverages for expenses that are non-refundable that someone has already prepaid. And so the recouping of the investment piece, but there are potential additional expenses that could be incurred if you're quarantining somewhere else. For example, hospital, not hospital, but accommodation, say hotel, potentially food associated with your stay of 10 to 14 days. Those are really covered best under the travel delay benefit. And then of course, if you're able to rejoin your group or your experience, the interruption and the delay benefit kick in to take you for alternative travel to rejoin your group and or will take you back to your point of departure or your home, so to speak.
You bring up a really good point when we talk about international travel, and my understanding that, with COVID potentially and the pandemic, that the medical insurance piece was very important. And, we know that many of us are traveling more domestically, but we look forward to that international travel again. Can you speak to the importance of that medical insurance right now, especially due to COVID? And I think many didn't realize how important that kind of insurance was, and potentially for the future, how important it will be.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you're traveling abroad, in many instances, your domestic primary health and care insurance does not cover you for that extended trip. Some may, but it's important to check before you depart. When traveling abroad, really medical is an important factor. Our plans and many of the plans out there that are travel medical focused, it's a combination not only of really the reimbursements or payments of expenses while abroad, but more importantly, it's the duty of care and the ability to access appropriate providers and facilities, i.e., physicians and hospitals, right?
Right.
And so companies like ours have third-party networks that we've gone ahead and negotiated predetermined rates for, and have already vetted out the appropriateness of these facilities, from a standards perspective. And so, while traveling abroad, really one of the biggest pieces is to know that you can contact someone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and receive appropriate care and or direction as it relates to those services. Not to mention, if there was an unfortunate incident where you actually need to be medically evacuated or repatriated out of a particular situation, those services are also a part of the medical component of coverage, which you wouldn't have on a domestic plan as well.
So just a couple of follow-up questions to that we received. A question came up with if you do come down with COVID and you become very ill, will they actually transport you because you have the COVID, or, because, for example, the airlines have all the waivers now. So can you actually travel back under the plan if you do have COVID, even if you have the medical insurance, or are you finding the experiences you're staying in that country until you've completed that quarantine? I know the airline piece is important if you're trying to get students back home. What has been your experience with getting them back home if they have COVID?
It's been very much a case by case scenario, as you might imagine, right? And so airlines and transportation are appropriately doing the right screenings and testing to determine ability to travel. Borders are open and closed at different times, and so we've been tracking that quite closely. So primarily, what we've seen is the ability to, if we need to repatriate or evacuate really someone from a particular facility that is not able to properly treat them, we're able to move them to an appropriate facility that is part of our network for care. Now, that could be a few miles away, it could be a country away, depending on the circumstances. But generally, they're then able to get the appropriate medical attention where they primarily are until they are testing negative for COVID, at which point they're then able to obtain alternative transportation back to their original departure place. And under the coverage of the insurance, the actual COVID or sickness, let's call it, is covered same as any other illness or sickness that would be experienced abroad.
So it's interesting because we've always encouraged our members to have a crisis plan. So whether it was COVID or a broken leg or something where someone became sick, it's always important to have that plan in place. But it seems now you're impacted even more potentially by not being allowed back into your country, or, there's a lot of rules to navigate. And it sounds like with the right coverages, both the trip interruption, the medical, and then having a resource that you can call to navigate through all of this is a key component of it, especially in this group market.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is, the service part of it that you just mentioned is a big piece, right? You have a literal lifeline, on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to help walk you through one, obtaining the right services and making it to the right locations, but also to walk you through return home and walk you through rebookings if necessary, and really being that extension of the group, the extension of the individual's family, right? To be that extra arm and reach out. So we definitely see that customer service side of what we provide as being extremely important in these situations.
As a follow-up, many of the travelers we work with are under 18. And I received a question is what happens if the parents have to fly to be with their student or their child? Is there any coverages that might help cover the family or the parents who then have to travel to, meet their younger student or retrieve their child, because they've gotten ill? That came up. I think under the pandemic, there were some people who had some situations where they didn't realize there's a bigger picture there. But I don't know if you could speak to any coverage, especially as it relates to minors.
Yeah, that's a great point. There is a benefit related to hospitalization if hospitalized as a result of an evacuation that provides some coverage for a third party, be it a parent or a chaperone of sorts,
Right.
to come to the bedside, literally of the individual. I think that's an area where there's opportunity for improvements and enhancements across the market in terms of having third party coverages, especially as it relates to minors. And it's an area that we are continuing to look into and try and expand on.
And just one last follow-up in terms of that is under the medical coverages, should the group need to be tested while they're on travel, would that be covered under the medical benefit? Thinking of you've got 5 kids or a group of kids together, if they're moving in pods or even the chaperones, is that covered, just the testing if they're in a country and they get stuck?
Well, from a testing standpoint, and we always go back to medical necessity as it relates to the eligibility of a claim or of a particular service. In many cases, testing and a positive result would certainly be deemed to be covered in that scenario, as well as any follow-up treatment that would be applied for those individuals.
It's great to know. I know that in our particular market, it's often a group that is traveling together. And I think that's where there were some of the challenges with many of our customers in that schools and administrators didn't really understand that they're not purchasing a group policy per se, or maybe there was some confusion around the group market. And I think we've all learned a lot from that. Can you speak to some key points for many of the student tour operators in helping to talk through travel insurance for groups with their customers, or some key learnings that you all learned coming out of this situation that we can help prevent? Or I think the communication piece is so important to the schools and our customers. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, most certainly. I think communication in its purest form is irreplaceable, right? And when it's communicated, and so timeliness is also quite important.
Mhm.
And it's really up to us as carriers, as promoters of the importance of travel insurance to help facilitate that process of communication. And it is something that we're working towards very strongly at this point. We always have provided materials for our partners and individuals to present, but I think there's lots of room for improvement. To your point, many of these plans, travel plans and coverages are offered through group structures and platforms, but are really individual decisions by each traveler. And so we've talked a lot with our partners about the idea of presenting the group travel on a mandatory basis, if it's a requirement by the group to even travel, and how we can help facilitate those types of communications. There's also opportunities for the group to purchase on behalf of a particular group traveling. It's not always the decision that is best for each group, but it's an option that's out there, and it's one that we can help facilitate as well.
That's great. And I think I also understand that should you need to use the travel insurance, your policy, that we saw a lot of the individual students and parents having to call in on their behalf because the policy was actually with the individual student. Will that still be the case you see in the group market where it won't be one person calling in for all of the students, but I understand that there's been a lot of have looked at that whole process when you have several students traveling together, all with a policy that we're on the same trip.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's one that we all kind of learned as we went to a certain extent. So it's not often that, historically, it's not
Yeah.
often that an entire group needs to or has to cancel, right? And so, from that aspect, while we had done what we consider to be bulk cancellations for groups, we had done some of that in the past, but it was not a process that was, let's say, streamlined. We've made great efforts to streamline that process as a result of the pandemic, and have coordinated quite closely with many of our group partners to help facilitate, excuse me, that process with us, so that each individual does not necessarily have to come in and start their own individual claim with us. Now that works extremely well, excuse me, with regard to a pre-trip cancellation or a
Mhm.
pre-trip rescheduling. But I think we'll always have the need for the individual one-to-one communication when it relates to any kind of medical claims or issues due to privacy, health information requirements.
That's great. That's really helpful. I know we all learned a lot out of this anomaly. Hopefully, that won't happen again. Another question came in specifically related to countries. I believe it may be Costa Rica, where they're requiring a certain amount of coverage in order to travel to the country and then maybe showing proof of that coverage. Are you familiar with that?
Absolutely, and Costa Rica is a good one. It's the one that's probably is most has most market awareness, probably because of proximity, but also the number of people that attend or visit that particular location. But there are a handful of others that also have enacted either minimum medical limits, say of 25,000 or 50,000 of medical coverage, and then others that are very specific as it relates to coverage for COVID, or COVID-19 in this case. In all of those instances, we've looked at those countries. We've been tracking the requirements.
Mhm.
In many cases, our existing plans, and therefore likely many in the market, we're already meeting some of those requirements. Um, some of the items, such as Costa Rica specifically, were a little unique, and we and others have taken steps towards increasing coverages specific to COVID, and primarily it was related to travel arrangements and accommodations should they be quarantined within that location. And so, on our existing suite of products, not only have we increased that, but we've also added a number of optional additional coverages, accommodations being one of them, to allow the individual to make that choice themselves.
Great. And I know one of the other areas, most of the callers today are in the group market, but I know that you've also worked with study abroad programs and exchange students and other kinds of students, and there are also policies for students that they can purchase if they're traveling on their own, if they're an older student as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So study abroad, or inbound student
Mm.
programs, things of that nature, um, obviously have been stifled to a certain extent as a result of the pandemic. And I know many participants and groups in the market are very excited to re-enter and start to travel again. We do offer international medical programs that are available to students. We're continuing to work towards expanded coverages for that. Again, primarily being medical focused products in this case because of the cross-border nature of the travel, and also with a high level of duty of care, and those really kind of emergency assistance services, for those individuals and their families. Right, we're an extension of the group. We're an extension of their families in the protection of those young people that are traveling.
No, I appreciate that. I think as we said, there's a much more heightened awareness of the value. I think before we might have thought about the dollar value of the trip and whether or
Mm.
not they were going to purchase the insurance. And we still, I know, talking with family members when they book a flight, they're still not sure if they should take the insurance or not. But I think there's definitely been a much greater awareness of the marketplace today and the different kinds of coverages that are available. As you look back on what Travel Insured has learned and the insurance industry and moving forward with the recovery of student group travel, are there a couple of points you'd like to leave us with as we move forward? We know we're super excited to say that groups are traveling today, and we're looking forward to hopefully a stronger fall and then a 2022. So, any thoughts that you'd like to share with us as we wrap up today?
Absolutely. So, again, appreciate being here with everyone and being able to talk through, the options and the changes in the market. I think what we'll see going forward is certainly a heightened awareness of our products in the market and travel insurance in general. There will be continuous developments in terms of options and plan designs. And it's really important to stay aware of those and to work closely with your partners in this market, right? To get the right educational materials in front of you and the right options for the right groups and the right types of groups. We've recently launched a couple of different plans with the optional benefits that has really made it much more dynamic as it relates to what's available to you. And I'm sure others have. And I think it's important to really be aware of the time sensitive periods, be aware of the triggered coverages, and in many cases as a group, to be timely as it relates to how you're presenting these products to the group leaders and to the individual students.
Great. Well, thank you again so much, Jason, for joining us today. Just for those on the call, we'll have some follow-up webinars. I know that some are country specific. We anticipate having a lot more dialogue with our partners in the travel insurance industry as we all look forward to students traveling again. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.